Hello and welcome to AWS Made Easy. Now, this is the show where we interview guests from AWS and AWS community, answer your questions about Gen AI, about cost optimization, and talk about the latest in AWS news. My name is Stephen Barr.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rahul Subramaniam, and we have a very, very exciting show today. We have Nathan Peck with us. Hi, Nathan. Welcome back to the show.
Hello. Welcome. It's good to be back.
Now, Nathan, he was on episode
Steve.
number 9, and I was just looking at the YouTube thumbnail. We were talking about CDK. That was
right.
This will probably be episode 119, so 110 episodes jump. Thank you so much for coming back. It feels like the world is quite different than it was back then.
Oh, yeah. A lot of things have changed. CDK is still fantastic, but there are definitely some significant changes over the last, year or two.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what you've been up to over this time, Nathan.
So the last time I was on stream, I was focused mostly on container IS deployments with Elastic Container Service and infrastructure as code. Still love those two topics for sure. But I'm focused a little bit more now on generative AI and specifically generative AI for developers. So the tools that can help developers be a little bit more productive, help them have a little bit more fun day to day in their jobs, and help businesses to produce a little bit more code potentially a little bit faster.
Definitely the hot topic of the hour. Everyone wants to figure out how to leverage AI to the maximum extent possible, particularly developers. So I think the audience is going to be super excited about this conversation that we're going to have today.
Well, I wanted to start with, I guess, a question about, do you remember maybe the moment or the use case where generative AI became like, wow, this is actually something I can use in production? Like when it was not just a cool toy and a curiosity. What was the thing it solved or did for you that was like, okay, I want to focus more on this?
So that would be, I think, when I was writing some code and I ran into an error message, and I was able to put that error message into generative AI chat and get an explanation of what it meant. I was then able to drop in the function that generated that error message and just tell it fix it, right? And it sped out a fixed version of that function. And it was something that was not completely trivial to solve, if I remember correctly. It required rewriting the function, and it was something I could have done, but I was able to do it in seconds rather than minutes. And I think that's the example of the type of small productivity gain that developers see all day, over and over again, as they're working with these generative AI tools.
So, Steven, what is it for you? We are all wearing our developer hats right now. What was that moment for you where you realized this is changing everything?
Well, maybe this was a bit later in the process, but I remember I was using an LLM and I had some data in one format and it needed some transformations and whatnot. And I was asking the LLM to help me write a Python function to do this transformation. And I thought, why don't I just ask the LLM to do the transformation for me? I only have to run this once. And so I just said, I have this, I want this, make this work. And it did it. It's like, okay, I'm not using LLMs effectively up to that point. That kind of changed my mindset about how I should use them as a productivity tool. And then really, I think as developers, sometimes we spend a lot of time on a function that might need to run once or run 5 times. And being able to change my internal effort cost model in terms of what I was going to use AI for. What about you?
I'd say I was using the LLMs for a while, but the moment it actually struck me was when I went back. I was doing something and I went to Stack Overflow and it said I had to log back in. And then I realized that I hadn't looked at Stack Overflow for weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And, I had not Googled for code-related stuff. I had not used Stack Overflow. And, I am a part-time developer. I'm not a full-time developer with all the other things that I do. But for me to not go to Stack Overflow or Google search, solutions to whatever I'm running into, that I think was this big aha moment. Like, okay, I can be focused within my IDE. I don't have to, do a command tab or go into some other place to figure out how to solve a problem. It's all right there, and it's solving it better than I have ever been able to solve before. So it happened weeks after I was actually using and kind of fully converted into it. But that moment was quite interesting.
Awesome. Well, Nathan, wanted to jump in to Amazon's AI offering. So what's the current lay of the land? I mean, we've got Bedrock, we've got Q Developer. There can be overlap between their offerings. So what's the current lay of the land?
Sure. So think of Bedrock as the foundational offering of LLMs that scale. There's going to be many different types of LLMs in there. We're going to try to get the biggest, best, smartest LLMs that we can find from whatever sources we can find them. So you'll see Meta's Llama in there. You'll see Anthropic Claude. You'll see Amazon Titan model. Basically, there's a lot of different models in there. And there is one Converse API which sort of smooths over all of the inconsistencies and differences between these models. So we're trying to make it super easy to switch to whatever model you want, whatever the latest and greatest current smartest model is. And so that's Bedrock. It's basically, think of it as convenience wrapper around a large array of different LLMs, and we're going to make sure there's always capacity for you on that. Per token pricing, really making it super simple to deploy and scale on top of LLMs. Now, on top of that, we're building sort of more consumer-facing applications with the Amazon Q brand. So you're going to see Amazon Q for Business, which is designed for sort of crunching business information. Amazon Q inside QuickSight. You got your essentially your spreadsheet of different data and stats, and you want to ask queries. The part that I'm personally most excited about, though, is Amazon Q Developer, which is a suite of tools that are designed to help accelerate developers' workflows, make their lives just a little bit easier. And all of this is built on top of Bedrock, basically. So think about it as the foundational layers. If you want to build your own LLM application from scratch, Bedrock is there. If you just want to experience the benefits of LLMs tied into your workflows, Amazon Q is the layer on top of that, where everything is sort of prepackaged, pre-built for you.
Great. So let's dive specifically into the developer tools. Now, we first started with Code Whisperer. I think that was kind of the first flavor of using LLMs to assist with building and writing code. Again, the scope of that was typically one file it did well. Anything more than a file, not quite. That then transformed into Q for developers, and then there was a bunch of other little pieces like Copilot and so on. So can you just lay it all out for us in terms of the developer tools landscape right now with all the LLMs, and how should we think about it?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of LLM tools out there. When you say Copilot, I assume you're referring to like GitHub Copilot. So that is
no, there's actually an Amazon Copilot CLI, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, Copilot CLI. Okay, so Copilot CLI was a tool for Amazon Elastic Container Service for deploying containerized deployments. That's not actually using generative AI at all. So it's not part of the Amazon Q umbrella. It is still out there. It is still a tool for managing your container clusters. But yeah, it often gets confused with GitHub Copilot, which is the LLM offering. So there's a little unfortunate overlap. I think we did come up with the name Copilot and released it first before GitHub Copilot. However, now the Copilot name has sort of been claimed by GitHub pretty effectively.
You got to take that up with Microsoft.
Yeah. So Q Developer, it is a suite of products that you can access across the AWS console. Inside of your IDE and on the CLI. And so we're calling it all Amazon Q Developer in all of the different places. And there are different functionalities that you'll find. So for example, when I'm in the console, I can ask questions about my AWS resources. I can chat with my AWS account. When I'm in my IDE, I can refactor code. I can explain code. I can do what we're calling feature development with a developer agent, which is a smart agent which follows chain of thought to think through how to solve a problem and do these really complicated multi-step development processes completely autonomously. Or I can just chat and ask it Amazon Q to change code or rewrite code piece by piece myself, depending on how much control I want. There's also code transformation, which is an overall ability to take an entire application and rewrite it for example, moving from an older version of Java to a newer version of Java. And there is also security scanning, which is it's not something you would normally think of as being an LLM powered activity. And you're right, it is basically a traditional static code analysis, but there's an added layer of LLM tie-in with Amazon Q Developer where we can start to rewrite that code and suggest automatic fixes to remediate problems that were highlighted in the security scanning. So we're sort of tying into all those aspects of the lifecycle, and that's increasing over time. So we're going to see more and more integration points into the developer workflow as Amazon Q Developer gains more and more functionalities.
Okay, so for the example on the security thing, if you had an input form and you were inserting that string directly into a SQL statement, right? You're going to say, okay, this is a prompt injection waiting to happen. Is that the kind of thing it's going to find? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm always surprised whenever I do this, it finds something for me. It'll even find in, for example, one of my favorite things, it'll find in CloudFormation template. It'll say, here, I notice a place where this is insecure setting needs to be fixed. But yeah, it'll fix code. It'll fix infrastructure as code templates. It'll fix a wide range of different things that always surprises me what it'll find.
I remember a long time ago when I was a teenager, I built a very primitive search functionality onto a website, which was literally, it was using Perl to interact with grep and then parse the results. I think that was so dangerous.
Let me guess, somebody managed to figure out how to sneak an RM-RF into there.
Luckily not, because they were just security through obscurity. But they easily could have. And there's no way I could have sanitized the inputs well enough to protect that.
Nope. There's always another way to break out of the bash and execute something. remote code execution as a service there.
Yeah,
exactly. So let's dive a little bit into the practicalities of how to kind of get started with Amazon Q for developers.
Yeah.
Can we jump right into a demo? Kind of just see how it operates, and then I have a whole bunch of questions that I want to cover on behalf of the audience. Go through that. Does that sound
sure thing
like a plan?
So I have a demo that I can show you. Let me bring up the AWS console here and my IDE side by side. And for this demo, I'm working with an application, and we're going to pretend that this is a little startup application called Grocer AI. And like most startups, there's usually a lot of turnover in startups. Engineers come and go. And the classic thing that happens at every startup is the person who originally coded the system left a while ago. They didn't leave any documentation behind. And the code is a little confusing. It's a little scary. Nobody knows how to work with it. When there is a bug in production, it tends to become a disaster because it's like, well, how do I fix this? How do I even deploy a fix, right?
Yeah.
So I have an application here, which is a shopping list manager for Grocer AI. And the users are currently reporting that the application is broken. And when I load it up, okay, it seems like the application is here. I don't really know what's going on with this application. I want to show some of the capabilities first.
Nathan, before we jump into those capabilities, I'm gonna try and do this in as serial an order as possible.
Oh yeah, sure.
So the number one area of confusion for most developers is, how do I even get started?
Oh yeah.
How do I sign up? There's the builder ID that shows up. There's my organization stuff. So there are multiple different ways to kind of get started with Amazon Q. Can you describe to us what's the easiest way
to get started with Amazon Q is to open up your AWS console if you have access to an AWS account and just click the Q button here. And when you open it up, you can start to chat with Amazon Q. So this is a good way to sort of trial things. However, if you're a developer, you're probably going to be most interested in installing an extension into your IDE. So for example, here you have the Amazon Q extension, which I installed directly out of the extension marketplace, for example, in VS Code. And I log in with an AWS Builder ID or Pro tier. So free tier, AWS Builder ID, think about it as basically like your GitHub account. when you have a GitHub account, you can carry that over to different software organizations throughout your software developer career. We're creating something similar to that for AWS, because there's a lot of folks now who they work at one company has an AWS account, they work at another company that has an AWS account, and we want to create one identity that can sort of follow you as you go through your career working with AWS. So think of the AWS Builder ID as that, and to sort of sweeten the deal for creating an AWS Builder ID, you get free tier access to Amazon Q, which is a very generous free tier in terms of number of interactions you can do per month. And it does not currently have any end to it. So you can interact with Amazon Q for, it's one of those always free tier things that you can get from AWS. The pro tier is the next level up, which is like if you have a company AWS account and you want to provision a bunch of accounts for everybody in your organization, you would probably go through the pro tier for that. Okay. And then it would log in using whatever your corporate identity provider is.
Awesome. This is, I think, the best explanation I've ever heard of Builder ID, or for the first time someone defining this as being the GitHub ID equivalent that you carry.
Yeah, exactly.
Organization.
I've
always been confused about it. It's almost like when Chime first started, you had a separate login for Chime, and then they tried to bring it into the console, but it wasn't quite in the console. And then I thought Builder ID was going down the same path of creating a different ID, which is not part of the console, but it's kind of still lingering around. But this makes sense now.
Yeah, ID is incredibly hard problem to solve, and it's not fully rolled out everywhere. But in the fullness of time, like I eventually want to see you using your AWS Builder ID for reInvent, for logging on to like repost, or a lot of the interactions you do with AWS will be through one identity that is not necessarily tied to the company that you're currently working for, like IAM roles currently are.
Excellent. Okay, so now we know how to get signed up in the IDE with the extension.
Yes.
What do we do next?
All right, so you got your ID, you got your extension in here. I've opened it up already, and we have a Q chat panel here. The chat panel is going to give us the interaction point to ask questions of Amazon Q. And one of the questions I like to ask, especially when dealing with an application I'm not 100% familiar with yet, is the at workspace, which references all code in the workspace. And I can start to ask questions like, where is this application deployed? So assuming that I have the code for this application, but I have absolutely no information about where it's even running. AWS has a lot of different ways of running things. Running on EC2, running as an AWS Fargate application, running as a Lambda function. And so you see that it has scanned through all the files in the repository and has found different indicators that explain the architecture of this application. So, for example, it's found a CloudFormation template, which shows that the service is deployed as a Fargate service. It's found key information such as the ECS cluster name that the service is deployed into. And it's also found some of the architectural explanations, such as an application load balancer routing traffic to the Fargate service. So you can start to see how this is already incredibly helpful if you're, dropping into a code base that you're not familiar with, and you don't know, like, is it running in Lambda? Is it running on Kubernetes? Is it running any number of different ways that it could possibly be running? But with this information, I can start to dig deeper, right? I can pop over to my AWS console over here, and I can ask a question such as, show me the shopping list cluster. Referencing this shopping list cluster that Amazon Q found in the. All right, I did not ask this question properly. Let me ask it a different way. List the ECS clusters in my account, and let's see if it'll show me the shopping list cluster.
Okay, so beforehand you would have had to say, okay, what's that AWS CLI?
Yeah,
command, AWS ECS list dash
clusters.
So
yeah,
the one of the challenges of these systems is that they're pretty non-deterministic, and so depending on how you word the question, it'll sometimes pick up that I'm asking about an ECS service, and sometimes it won't. So I did the most ambitious approach of seeing if it would locate this resource without even referencing what service. And sometimes it will work. In this case, though, I needed to use the information, the ECS cluster, name shopping list cluster.
That's a good point, because there's nothing stopping you from naming a DynamoDB table shopping list
Exactly.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or
yeah.
an RDS cluster, or an OpenSearch cluster, or any of these other services could have clusters.
Yep. Okay, and so now I can drill down a little bit deeper. I can say list the services in that shopping list cluster. Let's see if this works, because now it should theoretically have some extra contextual information about what service we're dealing with. So when I started out here, there was 0 context. Right now, there's more context. I'm referring to an ECS cluster, and I can just say list the services. And so I have a service here. I can even say, show me the details of that service. And I can look up the current status of this service, and it will show me a big dump of information here in a few seconds. And so, yeah, I've looked up basically the full information state. Full describe of this service. And so you can imagine I can start to consume this information and ask questions about it. In this case, though, we're trying to fix this problem of the service being unhealthy. So I click into the service and look at it, and we're seeing an error message here. And this error message is very, very long and confusing. Not really the type of error message that you probably want to see in production, and especially if you're trying to debug it, right? It's a little bit scary. So we can ask Amazon Q to solve this, though. Let's start a new chat. This is the best practice that I like to use, because similar to what you saw in the Amazon Q over here, like context is everything. Like once I built out a context, I'm asking about ECS clusters, then it understood, right? Well, in this case, I was asking about something completely different, and so if I ask more questions down here, it's still going to be referencing the context of the previous chat, and that could confuse things. So I like to start a new chat for every single different task.
Got it.
So I have got the code open here. I can see that the error message originated from this particular file, and I can see what the error message is. I can ask it, when I try to fetch grocery list, I get an error. How would I fix this? So as I said earlier, this is one of the things that wowed me first about generative AI, is this ability to take something that is super generic, and in this case, I do know how to solve it, but I'm pretending that I don't. But if this was a situation where I literally had never encountered this error before, this answer is going to save the day. So it's explaining that the error you're encountering is likely due to the batch get command having a limit on number of keys that can be fetched in a single request. DynamoDB documentation states the maximum number of keys is 100 for each of those. So to fix this issue, you can modify batch fetch groceries function to split the grocery IDs in smaller batches. And you see that it's actually written that code out for me right here. Let me expand this so you can see a little bit better.
And this is so neat, because paging is one of those annoying things you always have to implement, but it's like, okay, I'm sure I'm just doing a demo right now. I don't want to deal with paging.
Exactly.
Later.
And so I highlighted this one because this is something people totally forget when they write that demo. They forget to do the paging, and they forget to bring it to build in that limit. And so in this case, as soon as the application went over 100 items on the grocery list, it starts crashing. And so we can fix it though here very easily. Now, it's important to always ask generative AI to sort of follow up and think more, because in this case, this is definitely a working piece of code here. I can copy this and paste it into the file, and it'll work exactly as it currently is, but it's not actually done yet. Generative AI does not have the capability to sort of think through in layers of like follow-up thought. And so you'll actually see that it has suggested some follow-up questions, and I'm going to ask a follow-up question because I know that there's more that needs to be done here. And I think in general, like whenever I ask generative AI to do something, I find it's good to ask a follow-up question, either myself or suggest a follow-up question, to force it to think deeper. So here I'm asking, what are the potential performance implications of splitting requests into smaller batches in the batch fetch groceries function? Because you'll see what it's doing here is it's doing all these batches, but this for loop, it's fetching them one at a time in a serial fashion, right? So this endpoint is going to get slower and slower the more batches there are. And here you go. Once again, you're going to see it mentions the need for parallel processing. And use asynchronous programming techniques to fetch batches in parallel, which can help reduce overall latency. So I'm going to ask it as a follow-up. I want you to rewrite that code to make the batch get commands in parallel. And let's see, it should reference that code that we generated earlier, and it should update it according to the best practices that we saw earlier.
I'm curious. It just occurred to me. Usually when we're outside this developer tool, we force a chain of thought to get much better answers. I've never tried this. It just occurred to me. Could we try in parallel, just start another chat and give it the same problem and just say, produce a chain of thought as you're producing the answer, and analyze it in terms of performance, simplicity, and those aspects.
So it's a little bit tough because when you say a parallel chat, every chat has its own context. And so the way LLMs work, they're essentially amnesiac unless you've actually shared information into the context window.
No, I just wanted to start from the beginning of this one. Like we said, here's the error I have. Can you fix it?
Yes.
I wanted to, instead of doing this multi-chain, I was just wondering whether if you forced a chain of thought on the LLM, would it actually come up with the final answer in one shot? Can we try that experiment?
Possibly. I would have to tell it what I want, though. So in this case, I don't yet know that the problem is batch. It needs to break it up into batches.
The interaction revealed that was a bug. At this point, you didn't know.
So at this point, my human mind didn't yet know that there was batches. So I didn't know to ask for it to do parallel batch fetches, right?
No, but let's try this. So can you just start a new chat?
Yeah, sure.
And let's copy this and then just say, before you produce your answer, analyze your
answer. Think through best practices for
performance
data from DynamoDB and
no, actually not even that.
Performance.
Just
performance.
Let's give it vague.
So you're saying whatever answer you give me, it better be high performance.
Performance.
I see simple, reliability,
and cost effectiveness.
Reliability.
Right. These are all the pillars of your.
This will be interesting. Okay. Let's see what happens. This is a good test.
While we're waiting, I know we shouldn't anthropomorphize these things too much, but sometimes I wish I could tell people, ignore every silly thing I've ever asked you and just clear your context. Let me start a rich conversation. I think lawyers are the only people who can really do that, manage their internal context windows.
No, it didn't do it.
Yeah, it did the batch sizes.
No,
of 100.
It did the batch sizes, but it did not do them in parallel. It still has a for loop here. And so each iteration of the for loop is only doing one batch get command at a time. So, this is an example of how these things, when you try to get to do too much thought within a single prompt, it's unlikely to be able to do it unless you craft the absolute perfect query. Like there probably is a way for me to do it. I could probably do something like pretend that you are a DynamoDB expert who understands how to write the most performant DynamoDB code, something like that, like a persona-based query. And I could probably iterate on it to get it to generate in a single shot. But realistically, I don't think that that's a good use of a developer's time, right? There is a little bit of magic in being a prompt engineer who can get everything in a single shot. And I think there is a little bit of magic that can be done on the back end with these LLMs to get them to do more thinking autonomously and produce perfect answers in a single shot. But I think the reality is the true productivity gains come from a human mind in combination with these LLMs.
That makes a
So
lot of
exactly
sense.
what you see here, like sort of the active discovery, the active asking it to solve, asking it to think more, asking it to solve. This is where a human sort of in the driver's seat, thinking step by step and asking the AI to do more is going to be more effective because the AI is going to produce a better result with a little bit of extra prompting. And basically, I think this comes back to one of the core pieces of messaging that I tell people. As a software developer, you do not need to feel threatened by LLMs because there's still going to be SDEs. You kind of need a human mind to drive these things, and a human mind who understands best practices and can prompt the LLM to think more, think deeper, and to make the right decisions. It's not a fully autonomous system, although we're working on that too. If I get a chance, I'll see if I can demonstrate our feature development agent as well. That takes a little bit more time though.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry, because CloudFix uses AWS recommended savings techniques. It fixes, not just finds. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part of all, it works non-stop. Stop overspending on AWS and click on the link to start saving now.
Let me ask you a follow-up question, because this is something I struggle with all the time. How do you know that the answer that you've got is actually a good answer? And I struggle with this on two fronts. Number one is just psychologically, like I've been doing program analysis and code quality and static analysis and stuff like that for almost 2.5 decades now.
Yeah.
And one of the human psychology things that we keep talking about is that whenever your code snippets that you are reviewing go beyond a certain threshold, it becomes really hard to kind of comprehend what's going on, and particularly when you don't know the code and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you trust and rely on the LLM to say, this is good enough, let's use it?
All right.
What's your approach?
A couple different approaches to this. Okay, number one is tests. You can ask the AI to also generate tests, and I think every application should have tests. Normally, writing tests is one of those things that's a little boring. Developers don't love it unless they're really all in on test-driven development, right? But the reality is, AI does a pretty good job at writing tests, and so I should be building a very comprehensive test suite as I go. So I think if I had a full mapped out demo and a lot of time here, I would also have shown generating a test for this exact same scenario of more than 100 ideas, right? And verifying that it actually worked. So think about it as like test-driven development. This is not a replacement for traditional development best practices like writing tests. The other way to think about it, though, is an AI that is spitting out a piece of code can be asked to self-analyze. And often that's what you see here. It's done a fairly decent job at coming up with a list of different follow-up prompts, such as what are the potential performance implications of what I just did, right? And by asking it to answer that own question, it spit out more information, which I was able to analyze to give myself better trust about this. Now, the reality is there are layers and layers to this. Like you can keep digging forever. You could ask it to review this code as if you were a principal engineer, right? You could ask it to review this code as if you were a DynamoDB expert with 10 years of experience working with DynamoDB, right? And so you can spin up multiple parallel chats with this LLM and ask it to take on different personas and think through previous stuff that it had generated and think about it again. So don't think about it as like a single shot. None of the LLMs out there on the market are producing perfect code on the first try. It is an iterative process of continuing to improve that code. And that's where a human in the driver's seat is going to do a little bit better. and provide the expertise that these models need, but they're just going to be able to rewrite this code a lot faster than they would if they were typing it all out by hand and refactoring it by hand every single time. They're basically driving the refactor process through higher level prompting rather than manual hands-on keyboard typing every single thing.
Makes sense. Steven, any insights from you on this?
I'm just thinking, I mean, there's so many different ones. It's amazing how I keep going back to that mental cost model of, okay, how much effort does it take to write a certain function? How perfect does it need to be? I've got a personal AI agent project that I'm working on, and functionally, it's great. I really like it. It's 1,200 lines of pretty ugly, disorganized Python, but I don't have that like looming debt anxiety, because I know at some point I can just tell my LLM of choice, okay, help me clean this up. And I think sometimes as engineers, and maybe this is just me, so I don't want to project, but it's easy to think that, okay, on my first go at this problem, I need to solve all of the future problems too. I need to solve scaling and reliability. And I like using LLM, say, okay, I'll use this function, whatever it gave me, until it becomes a binding constraint. And otherwise start thinking about my time and moving on.
And I think that also over time, we're going to start to see more autonomous agents that you can tie into your source code, and you can have a refactoring agent that has a rule set of best practices about performance and scalability, and it's periodically suggests PRs against your code base that says, hey, I've looked at your code base. I noticed a place where we can refactor this function to be a little bit faster, a little bit more performant. And so I think that at that point, you would have SDEs also doing a little bit more curation, a little bit more validation as these autonomous agents sit there in the background. And I think that this is great because I've never worked at a software development shop that didn't have a significant backlog of performance and bug fixes and little things that need to be maintained at the same time as you're trying to develop all the new features, right? And you never have a chance to get through all of them, right? So one of the things that I think is pretty crazy about Amazon Q Developer is, if you've ever seen the SDE bench, we have it's like a competition of which agent is able to solve different open source GitHub issues. Yeah. And the Amazon Q Developer autonomous agent is at an almost 40% solve rate on the sample data set of GitHub issues. So you can start to imagine a world where a significant percentage of the backlog items in your Jira board or GitHub issues or wherever you're working can have PRs open against them automatically. And even if that PR isn't 100% perfect, I think at the latest stats that I saw, about 40% worked out of the box, 60% did not work. Even among those 60% that did not work out of the box, how close were they to a final solution? They probably would accelerate, at least some large portion of the work, such that a human developer would come in and finish off that task.
And a lot of them would require things that are bugs, but they might be really ambiguously defined, right?
Yeah.
So even assuming that 100% were solvable or within scope, right? So that 40% might be 40% out of 70% that were actually feasible.
Yeah, that's true. I didn't think about that, but you're probably right. Yeah, some of those may not even be feasible.
We're just looking at like feature requests and then pull requests on public repositories. There's a lot. It's great to see the optimism in what people think is achievable.
So Nathan, I'm going to request, and this is the tall order.
Yes.
Let's lay down some advice and some best practices for developers who are exploring and starting with Q, for them to make the most of it. So if you were to list out 5 things that they should, absolutely.
Right. I don't know if I'll come up. I don't know if I'll come up with exactly
let's
5.
do whatever list.
But let me start off with one of the biggest ones, which is don't fall into believing like all the hype. Like there's a ton of hype out there about SDEs are going to be gone. This is going to do everything that you do day to day, and this is going to completely replace you. Okay, that messaging I think is a little misguided. And I think what happens is developers actually hear that, and then they go into a tool like Amazon Q Developer or any of the other LLMs out there, and they actually expect it to do everything right off the bat, and write all the code, and then they become disappointed that it doesn't. It's like, okay, actually, let's rethink this. Let's think about what percentage of that was it actually able to solve, and what parts did it solve? Probably some of the most boring and like tedious boilerplate code that you didn't love writing anyway, and you're still writing the exciting bits. You're still writing the difficult bits that the LLM can't handle. So I guess my best practice number one is like, don't go in there expecting too much. Like, it's going to do a percentage of the work that you do day to day, and most of that percentage is going to be the most boring, tedious stuff. It's not going to be able to be thinking about really smart things and solving things right off the bat. The second best practice is don't try to do too much at once. People will try to throw in an entire whole feature in or ask it to do a lot of things at once. Like you saw in the demo that I did earlier, you have to kind of do a chain of prompts to get to your final goal. And so it's still important to learn best practices. It's still important to think through what I got out of this previously. Was it good enough, or do I need to ask it to do some more work? The same way that you would kind of approach this of coding it and then refactoring it and adding more to it. It's the same thing when working with an LLM. There's a couple other fun little tips I can give you about how to interact with an LLM. It can be nice to ask the LLM to play the role of a particular persona, and I like to also ask it to review my code before I actually open the pull request. So if I've made some changes to a piece of code, before I ever open that PR, I'll ask the AI, review this as if you were a principal engineer, and explain what you see in this PR that may not be good enough. And so I'm actually I'm asking the AI to challenge me. And by challenging me, it actually sometimes teaches me something or highlights something that I had missed the first time around. It's the ultimate like rubber duck assistant.
Yeah. I mean, an amazing peer programmer.
Exactly.
Really.
Yeah.
And one that doesn't get tired and ask you to order pizza.
But most importantly, it never ridicules you. So this is one of the classic things. Like I remember early Stack Overflow. A lot of the communities out there, when I was learning programming, I would ask a question. I was a complete noob at the time. I didn't know what I was doing. And so somebody would in the comments would be like, that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. How did you ask that question? Because there was a certain sense of elitism, right? Yes. And that's one thing you'll never see in the LLM. Like, these LLMs are designed to be friendly. I guess you could probably try to design like an unfriendly LLM, but they are fundamentally friendly, and they try to be helpful and polite and nice to you as they ask your as you ask your question that was probably completely misguided.
I've got a follow-up question for you, and I know that our time is getting short. From the cost perspective, so if you are looking at the AWS bill and you're looking at the new line items of Q and Bedrock, but you're also thinking, okay, my developers are more productive. How do you look at that calculus? What factors go into it? And how do you say, okay, the expense of this is justified?
Okay, so Q Developer Pro, the business tier, is currently $19 a month per user. And that's a drop in the bucket. Like, if you think about how much an SDE costs per hour, if their SDE saves 30 minutes a month, you've more than paid for that. So I don't think it's actually a financial thing at this point in time. I don't think there's any reason to be like, I'm not going to adopt Amazon Q Developer because it's expensive. I think the main thing people are looking at is how much more effective are my engineers when they have access to a tool, and what is the most effective tool that I can give them. And so we're trying to build the most effective tool. We're always looking for feedback from users as to what they found effective. Did they get an answer back from Amazon Q Developer that wasn't helpful? How can we improve this product to make it more efficient and easier for people to use? I think that's going to be the key. I don't think cost is going to be the major factor in this AI. It's going to be more about the usability and the experience day to day of using it as a developer.
I think, as a parting thing, I have one piece of feedback. We would love to get Q to be able to answer questions about IAM
Oh yeah, to answer your question about IAM, yeah. So we're starting to get there. So we made a recent change where Amazon Q Developer will now at least offer links to documentation. So it'll say like, I can't currently answer your question about this IAM, but I can recommend a link to this documentation. That documentation is usually what you need to solve that problem. There's some improvements we need to make around there. Like every LLM has guardrails to prevent it from saying harmful things. And right now, I think the guardrail for IAM policy is a little bit misguided. It's a little bit strict. It's very afraid that it will recommend a bad IAM policy that will allow somebody to hack your account or will provide elevated access. And so it defaults to trying not to provide any IAM policies whatsoever. So there's definitely improvements we need to make there on that front. And that's something you'll see improve week over week, actually, and month over month as I've worked with this product. I see it get better every single time I use it.
That's pretty awesome.
Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. If you are on LinkedIn or on Twitter, make sure to follow Nathan. We'll put your social links in the video description. Also on community.aws, you've got some great articles there as well.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thanks once again, Nathan. And always a pleasure to have you. I can't wait for the next time for you to be back on the show.
Yeah, sure thing. And hopefully next time I'll have even more exciting things to show off.
Exactly. And I'm really hoping we don't wait another 100 episodes.
I hope so too.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Soon. Bye.
Bye.